welcome. It's Kate Griffiths from Whole Self Leadership, and today I'm coming on to talk to you about chapter 9 of our book, which is called Philosophy for Life. Here it is, just in case you're wondering. And we're getting into politics, and I must admit, when I first realised, I was a bit like, oh God, do I really want to get into that? But actually, I loved this chapter, and I want to share with you why. And I'm going to give you an example. Most of you who watch my channel know that I've got a dog. Well, any ideas what this is? This is what remains of my thing that goes over my microphone. I've forgotten what you call it. The dog has eaten it. Because that's what dogs do. They have a mind of their own. They won't be controlled. They're probably naturally anarchists. And if they were left to go wild, they, well, goodness only knows what it'd be like in the house. But they have that energy about them, the vibrancy. It drives you nuts sometimes, but you can't help loving them. And in a sense, this is what this first chapter is about. It's about Diogenes, and I probably completely mullered his name there, and the Cynics. And I always think about Cynics being world weary, but actually what they were is more like, satirical, a bit like Private Eye, and shining a light on all the corruption in society. And it sort of comes back to this thing that when there's a group of people kind of are terrified of speaking their mind because they want to fit in, they want people to like them. And that's more important quite often than the truth. And so you end up in this very contorted things and people not saying things because they don't want to offend someone. And it's the slippery slope, isn't it? So I love this chapter because he talks about Jules Evans, that is the author, talks about the Occupy movement, which was around 10 years ago, which again was an alternative view on what democracy could look like, and really captured the essence of the Cynics because it was people living on the streets. A bit, could say if you're being unkind, it was a bit like street theatre, but it was about offering a different way of doing democracy. And of course it took time. If everyone's involved in a conversation on something in a meeting, it takes time to make a decision. And that's possibly why we ended up with different ways of doing government. But if you think about it, just think about how much shame there is in our society, how people are afraid. Maybe, it's simple things like, doing a video and stuff, but all sorts of things about how people might perceive them, might judge them, might find them lacking. And so that informs how they show up or don't show up in society. And I think that's really sad, and also it isn't who we are in our beingness. We're something amazing, incredible, and yet we do get overwhelmed. I'm conscious that there is a lot of that energy around at the moment. I've talked to 2 clients this week who are feeling really oppressed in different ways. Now you could say that some of that's to do with the lunar eclipse that's coming up on Friday, and that can emit a lot of negative stuff, and that can impact on how people feel. I know I felt really, really tired today, and I had to have a rest because I couldn't do any more. And so self-care is really important, and I'm lucky because I work for myself, I can do that. And yet it's much more than that. So I thought I'd share a story that kind of talks to some of this in terms of the application in modern day life. So you may not believe this, but when I was younger, I was really shy. I didn't like to talk to people. I found it quite difficult. And I remember sharing that story with my grandmother. And she said to me, well, actually, Kate, she was a really good, very sociable woman. People like to talk about themselves, and really you being shy and self-conscious is you're thinking too much about yourself, and that's a bit selfish. I remember initially feeling a bit taken aback by it. I said, why don't you think of some questions to ask people? And it was the best piece of advice she ever gave me. And I still remember it to this day, many years later, because it took out the fear and the shame of not being good enough. because I didn't have to think about myself. I could just ask people about themselves and get curious about who they were and what was important to them and stuff like that. And so, and in a way, that is philosophy in action, and that's what this chapter talks to about, you know, how can you really counter how you're feeling, because a lot of our shame comes from, well, we're terrified of being ridiculed or being made fun of. But actually, if you turn it around and just go, I don't care, and do sort of maybe silly things and pranks and stuff like that, or even do things that you find scary. So they give the example of Albert Ellis, who couldn't really talk to girls, and so he went up to different women in Brooklyn Botanical Gardens and sat next to them on a bench and talked to them, and finally overcame that fear. And I think it is really possible, step by step, to do that, but it takes, you know, sometimes takes a bit more. And that's why I wanted to bring in the spritzer that I'm working with at the moment, with all of this sort of negative energies. I don't know if you can see, it's a beautiful gold colour. And this is called Radiance. It's actually not a colour mirror spritzer. It comes from the starlights, which are made by Karani, or she came up with them. And it's an absolutely amazing and really powerful smell. And it helps bring you back into your power, because there's something really pungent about it. And maybe you can just get a sense of that essence as you listen to me. So whilst, you know, the jury's out as to how we can live as cynics, I mean, some more modern day examples of people like Rousseau and stuff like that, you know, but a lot of them, or so the author would have us believe, were sort of looking for attention from the crowds. And certainly Diogenes was a bit like that, you know, doing silly antics in order to make people laugh and like him. Is it really a possible way of living in community? Probably not, you know, because we do need some of the things that are provided by the state. We're very lucky in the UK to have a National Health Service. If you get ill, you can, you know, if it's things that you can't use alternative medicine, you can get access to a GP or to a hospital. So I think, but what I love about it, and I think for me is what I will be taking away from this chapter, is shining a light on corruption and really questioning this need for consumerism, buying things we don't need, because that's actually what makes people anxious and neurotic, trying to keep up with the Joneses. It comes about status and all of these things. We don't need any of that. Really what we're here for is to connect to one another. And we could do that in a field, or in the middle of nature, or going camping, or around a campfire, you know. And that is what matters and what's important. But also first off by connecting into ourselves, so that we know who we are and what we're here for. So I hope that's given you some food for thought. I'd love to know what you think, so do feel free to drop me a line or put a comment underneath the video. Thanks very much, and have a wonderful week wherever you are.